There is a kind of person you have met at least once in your life. Someone who has been through things that would have destroyed most people. Loss, betrayal, failure, humiliation. Things that would have left the average person bitter, broken, permanently diminished. And yet, they are not broken, they are not bitter. They are not performing strength either. That hollow, brittle kind of strength that shatters the moment no one is watching. They are simply still. Not cold, not distant, not numb. Still. And you have felt it in their presence, a quality of groundedness that you could not explain. As though they were rooted somewhere deeper than ordinary people. As though the storms that move other people simply pass through them without finding anything to destroy. You have probably asked yourself, how? What do they know that I don't? What happened to them or inside them that created that quality? The answer is not what most people expect. It is not that they stopped feeling. It is not that they built better walls. It is not that they found the right mindset, the right morning routine, the right motivational framework. It is that they stopped running from themselves. And today we are going to understand exactly what that means. Because the path to becoming someone who cannot be broken does not go through strength. It goes through something far more demanding. It goes through truth. Carl Jung spent his entire life mapping the territory between who we think we are and who we actually are. And what he found there, in that gap, in that dark space between the presented self and the actual self, is the only real answer to why some people break and others don't. This is not a video about becoming stronger. This is a video about becoming real. And real, it turns out, is unbreakable in a way that strong never could be. Let's begin. The wound beneath the wound. Most people think they know what hurts them. The relationship that ended. The parent who never said enough. The opportunity that was taken. The friend who disappeared exactly when they were needed most. And these things are real. The pain they carry is real, but they are not the source. They are the trigger. What they triggered is the source. Jung introduced a concept that most people encounter intellectually, and very few people actually allow to land. The idea that beneath every emotional reaction, there is a belief. And beneath every belief, there is a wound. And beneath every wound, there is a story you began telling about yourself so early in life that you have completely forgotten you were the one who wrote it. He called the collection of these stories the complex. Not complex as in complicated, though it is. Complex as in a cluster. A system of connected memories, emotions, and beliefs organized around a central wound that you have never directly examined, but that quietly governs enormous portions of your behavior. You don't know it's there. That's the entire problem. You think you are reacting to what just happened. You are actually reacting to everything that ever happened that felt like this. The current situation is simply the key that opened the old door. And when that door opens, everything behind it floods out, and you experience it as a present moment feeling rather than as a 40-year-old wound being activated. This is why people cannot simply decide to stop being hurt. This is why willpower does not work on emotional pain. Because the pain is not where you think it is. You are trying to treat the symptom while the cause sits untouched in the dark. And it will keep sending symptoms. Different symptoms, same cause. A different relationship, the same pattern. A different failure, the same voice inside telling you the same story it has always told. Until you go to where the actual wound is. Not to punish yourself for having it, not to explain it away, but to finally, for the first time, see it clearly. Name it. Sit with it, without immediately trying to make it stop. Because it is only when you can be present with your own wound, without fleeing from it, that the wound loses its power to govern you from the dark. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Most people call their patterns fate. They call them bad luck. They call them just who I am. They have never considered that what feels most like fate is usually the most consistent evidence of the unexamined wound doing its work. If this content changes something in you, subscribe to this channel and like the video. Why walls don't work. Every person who has been hurt significantly has developed a strategy. Some become hard. They decide that the way to stop being hurt is to stop caring. They cultivate a deliberate distance from their own feelings, from other people, from situations that require vulnerability. They call this being realistic. They call this not being naive. They call this protecting themselves. And for a while, it seems to work. The pain becomes duller. The distance creates the illusion of safety. But here is what actually happens. When you build a wall to keep pain out, you build the same wall to keep yourself in. The wall does not discriminate. It blocks everything equally, not just the suffering but the joy, the genuine connection, the aliveness that only comes from being fully present in your own life. And underneath the wall, the wound is still there, perfectly preserved, unchanged by the years of protection, because wounds don't heal in the dark. They don't heal when they are defended against. They heal when they are seen. There is another strategy. Some people don't build walls. They build performance. They become extraordinarily competent, extraordinarily busy, extraordinarily productive. They fill every moment with achievement or activity or helping others, anything that prevents the moment of stillness in which the wound would have to be felt. This strategy is more socially rewarded than walls. People praise the achiever. They admire the helper. They celebrate the person who keeps going regardless of what they are going through. But the wound is still there, still untouched, still sending its messages in the form of anxiety that arrives without obvious cause, in the form of an emptiness that the next achievement never quite fills, in the form of a restlessness that cannot be stilled no matter how much is accomplished. Jung saw both of these strategies as aspects of what he called the persona, the constructed self that we present to the world and eventually to ourselves. The persona is not inherently false. It is not inherently bad. Every person needs a functional social self. The problem is when the persona becomes the entirety of what we believe ourselves to be, when we have so thoroughly identified with the constructed self that we have lost contact with what lies beneath it, because what lies beneath it is not the wound alone. What lies beneath it is also everything the wound has hidden. The capacities that never developed because they were too vulnerable to bring out. The genuine desires that were buried because they were not acceptable. The real self, not the performed self, not the protected self, but the actual person who was there before the strategy began. And that person is still in there, waiting, not with resentment, but with a patience that is almost unbearable when you finally make contact with it. The walls don't work because they were never protecting you from the world. They were protecting the wound from the one person who could actually heal it. You. The shadow and what it actually means. Of all Jung's ideas, the shadow is the most misunderstood and the most important. Most people, when they hear about the shadow, imagine it as the dark side, the angry self, the violent self, the shameful self, the parts we hide because they are bad. And yes, those are in the shadow, but they are not the whole of it. And this is where the real revelation lives. The shadow contains not just the parts of yourself you rejected because they were too dark. It contains the parts you rejected because they were too bright, too much, too vulnerable, too real. Your capacity for genuine joy. If you grew up in an environment where happiness was dangerous or naive or socially unacceptable, it went into the shadow. Your natural assertiveness, if you learned early that making your needs known was dangerous or selfish, it went into the shadow. Your creativity, your playfulness, your capacity for wonder, If these were met with ridicule or indifference, they went into the shadow too. The shadow is not just your darkness. It is everything you decided was not safe to be. And here is why this matters, for the question of becoming someone who cannot be broken. Every time someone or something activates a strong irrational emotional reaction in you, the disproportionate anger, the inexplicable jealousy, the sudden collapse of self-esteem in the face of a single comment, that reaction is the shadow speaking. It is not the current situation. It is a buried part of yourself recognizing something it knows and responding with the full force of everything that was never processed. Jung called this projection. What we cannot see in ourselves, we see in others. The qualities we most loudly condemn in other people are almost always the qualities we have most completely buried in ourselves. The rage at someone else's selfishness often contains a buried selfishness that was never allowed to exist. The contempt for someone else's weakness often contains a buried vulnerability that was never allowed to be felt. This is not a comfortable idea. It is not meant to be. It is meant to be useful. Because once you understand that your strongest reactions are maps of your buried self, you stop being a victim of those reactions. You start being a detective. Every strong, irrational reaction becomes an invitation, not to act on it, not to suppress it, to ask, what part of me is this pointing to? What have I buried here that is trying to get my attention? This is what Jung meant by integrating the shadow. Not embracing your darkness as an excuse, not performing your wounds as an identity, but bringing into conscious awareness the parts of yourself that have been exiled, looking at them clearly, and reclaiming what was always yours. When you have done this work, even partially, even imperfectly, something changes in the way the world can affect you. Because the world's power to hurt you depends almost entirely on the size and the darkness of your shadow, on the size of what you have not yet seen in yourself. The more you see, the less there is for the world to find. The alchemy of suffering. Jung was fascinated by alchemy, not as chemistry, as metaphor. The alchemists, he believed, were not really trying to turn lead into gold. They were projecting an inner process onto matter. The transformation they were actually describing, the only transformation that ever really occurs, was the transformation of the human soul. Lead into gold. The heavy, dark, burdensome parts of the self. The wounds, the shame, the buried capacities, the denied experiences. Transformed through the application of consciousness and acceptance into something of genuine value. Into strength that is not performed. Into wisdom that is not borrowed. Into a quality of presence that cannot be manufactured. This is what suffering is for. Not in a passive, resigned sense, not because pain is good, but because pain, when it is not fled from, not suppressed, not immediately medicated out of existence, pain, when it is sat with, examined, allowed to speak, contains the specific information that no comfortable experience can provide. It tells you where your wound is. It tells you what has not been integrated. It tells you what story you are still telling yourself that is no longer true. It tells you which wall has become a prison. Every significant suffering contains an invitation to know yourself more completely than you did before it arrived. Most people respond to this invitation by building a faster escape route. They are not wrong to want out of the pain, but the exit they choose, the wall, the performance, the numbing, takes them away from the very information that could set them free. Jung wrote that in every crisis there is hidden an opportunity for transformation, but the opportunity is only accessible to someone who is willing to stay long enough in the darkness to let their eyes adjust. And when your eyes adjust, when you stop running from the feeling long enough to actually feel it, name it, trace it to its source, something remarkable happens. The feeling changes. Not immediately, not completely, but it changes. Because most of what we experience as unbearable emotional pain is not actually the feeling itself. It is the resistance to the feeling, combined with the fear that if we truly feel it, it will destroy us. We are suffering from the effort of not feeling, as much as from the feeling itself. When the resistance drops, when you stop fighting the pain and simply let it be present, look at it, stay with it, you discover that you can feel it without being destroyed by it. That it is painful, yes. That it is real, yes. But that it is not the annihilation it felt like when you were running from it. And in that discovery, that you can feel the full weight of your own experience and survive it, is the beginning of the kind of strength that nothing outside you can manufacture or remove. Because you no longer need the world to be gentle with you. You can handle what it brings. Not because you are hard, because you are real. Individuation, becoming what you actually are. Jung called the destination individuation. It is the most misunderstood word in all of his work because it sounds like individualism, like becoming more separate, more isolated, more uniquely yourself in a way that sets you apart from others. That is not what it means. Individuation means becoming undivided, becoming whole, bringing together the presented self and the hidden self, the light and the shadow, the strength and the wound. The person you show the world and the person who lives in the private darkness of your own interior, and integrating them into a single coherent self that does not contradict itself. Most people live divided. The self they show publicly is at war with the self they experience privately. The strength they perform is in constant tension with the vulnerability they feel. The confidence they project sits on top of a terror of being found out. The love they give is contaminated by the resentment of giving more than is ever given back. This division is exhausting. It is the source of the background exhaustion that so many people carry without being able to explain it. Not the tiredness of having worked hard, but the tiredness of maintaining a division that never rests. Individuation is the slow, painful, never quite complete process of ending that division, of becoming the same person in public that you are in private. Not performing your wounds as vulnerability and not hiding your wounds as strength, but simply being the actual person with the actual history, with the actual capacities and the actual limitations, present in the actual moment. This is what makes the person who cannot be broken. Not the absence of wounds, not the achievement of psychological perfection, but the presence of a self that is no longer at war with itself. A center that holds not because it is made of something harder than what strikes it, but because it is no longer divided against itself. When you are whole, there is no crack for the attack to enter. Not because you have sealed yourself against the world, but because there is nothing hidden inside you for the world's attacks to find and use against you. The weapon of shame requires a secret. The weapon of rejection requires a wound that has never been claimed. The weapon of criticism requires a fear that has never been faced. When you have done the work, when you have gone into the dark and brought back what was lost, these weapons find nothing to hold on to. You can still be hurt, you will still feel pain, but the pain will not unmake you. Because you are no longer depending on any particular outcome, any particular person's approval, any particular circumstance's maintenance to remain coherent. You are coherent from the inside, and that is something the world cannot give you and cannot take away. This is what makes the person who cannot be broken. Not the absence of wounds, not the achievement of psychological perfection, but the presence of a self that is no longer at war with itself. A center that holds not because it is made of something harder than what strikes it, but because it is no longer divided against itself. When you are whole, there is no crack for the attack to enter. Not because you have sealed yourself against the world, but because there is nothing hidden inside you for the world's attacks to find and use against you. The weapon of shame requires a secret. The weapon of rejection requires a wound that has never been claimed. The weapon of criticism requires a fear that has never been faced. When you have done the work, when you have gone into the dark and brought back what was lost, these weapons find nothing to hold on to. You can still be hurt, you will still feel pain, but the pain will not unmake you. Because you are no longer depending on any particular outcome, any particular person's approval, any particular circumstance's maintenance to remain coherent. You are coherent from the inside, and that is something the world cannot give you and cannot take away. So here is what we know. The people who cannot be broken are not people who stopped feeling. They are people who stopped pretending. They went into the territory that most people spend their entire lives carefully avoiding. The territory of the wound, the shadow, the buried self. And they did not come back unchanged. They came back whole, not perfect, not without pain, not beyond the reach of difficulty or loss or grief, but whole. And wholeness, it turns out, is the only armor that actually works. Because it is not armor at all. It is presence. It is the full, clear, undefended reality of someone who knows what they are made of because they have looked. Jung gave us the map. The unconscious, the shadow, the persona, the wound, the process of individuation. These are not abstract psychological concepts. They are the actual territory of your inner life. And the degree to which you have explored that territory is the degree to which you are free. You can begin today, not with a dramatic transformation, with a single, honest question. What am I not looking at? What is the feeling I keep pushing away? What is the pattern I keep explaining as bad luck? What is the story I keep telling about who I am that I have never once examined? Start there, because the path to becoming someone the world cannot break does not begin with strength. It begins with the courage to look. Write in the comments, I choose to look, and mean it. Because that choice, that single, difficult, courageous choice, is where everything real begins. See you in the next one. Comment your reviews.